This is Malcolm Ryder, broadcasting live from Station 17. If you can hear this, if anyone out there is still listening, then know that I am still here, still talking, still documenting everything as it happens. It has been exactly 24 hours since the first emergency alert came through. I was sitting in this very chair, adjusting the signal, preparing for my usual nightly segment when the first reports started trickling in. Strange, unconfirmed at first, isolated incidents of people acting erratically, violent outbursts in the streets, and hospitals suddenly overwhelmed with patients suffering from what officials initially called an unknown viral infection. I remember the moment the first real footage aired on national news. A shaky cell phone recording, paramedics struggling to restrain a man foaming at the mouth, his eyes unfocused, body convulsing violently. He attacked them mid-rescue, his strength unnatural, his movements erratic, yet deliberate. He did not respond to pain, to commands, to any form of restraint. He tore into one of the responders, bit into his neck like a starving animal. The camera fell, the screen cut to black, and within minutes, news stations across the country were reporting similar outbreaks. By the time authorities issued a public warning, it was already too late. The infection, whatever it was, moved too fast, spreading through cities like wildfire. Panic set in. People flooded supermarkets, emptied gas stations, clogged every major road in a desperate attempt to escape. But escape to where? It wasn't localized. It was everywhere. By nightfall, emergency broadcasts replaced scheduled programming. They urged people to stay indoors, barricade their homes, avoid anyone displaying signs of aggression or disorientation. But fear does strange things to people. Rational thought collapsed, giving way to hysteria. Families turned on each other. Neighbors who had known each other for years locked their doors, ignoring desperate pounding from those who had been bitten, pleading for help, for shelter, for answers. I stayed here in the station, watching it all unfold through the endless stream of reports, government warnings, and intercepted emergency transmissions. The military deployed to major cities within hours, setting up containment zones, enforcing brutal lockdowns. They treated the infected like rabid animals, gunning them down in the streets, firebombing entire blocks to slow the spread. At first, it seemed cruel, inhuman. But then, I saw what they were fighting. Surveillance footage leaked online, security cameras from hospitals and police stations capturing the impossible. The infected were not just sick, they did not weaken, they did not succumb to wounds, to exhaustion, to anything that should have stopped them. A man with his chest torn open kept moving, his limbs twitching unnaturally. Another, missing half his face, turned and lunged at an officer before taking 4 bullets to the skull. Only then did he stop. Some scientists theorized it was a mutated strain of rabies, but no known virus acted this way. Rabies killed, it did not resurrect. Then there was the matter of the incubation period. A typical viral outbreak takes time, days, sometimes weeks to spread. This took hours. A single bite, a scratch, or even exposure to infected bodily fluids led to rapid transformation. The body temperature spiked, cognitive function deteriorated, motor skills became erratic, but strength increased exponentially. Pain receptors dulled, allowing them to continue moving despite catastrophic injuries. And then the hunger set in. It wasn't about survival. It wasn't about consuming for energy. It was compulsive, mindless, an endless cycle of attack and consumption with no biological reason. That was the part that frightened me the most. Viruses exist to replicate, to spread, to ensure their own survival. But this acted with no logical purpose. I have been broadcasting all night, listening to scattered reports from those still alive, still resisting. Some claim the military is losing control, their defenses crumbling under the sheer volume of the infected. Others whisper of safe zones, fortified compounds hidden in remote locations where those with power and influence were secretly evacuated before the outbreak was made public. If that's true, then someone knew. Someone saw this coming and prepared for it, while the rest of us were left to fend for ourselves. I don't know how long I can keep this up. The power is still holding. The signal's still strong, but the station is no longer safe. The streets outside are eerily quiet now, but that's worse than the screams. The infected don't stop. They don't sleep. They are out there, always moving, always searching, and it's only a matter of time before they find me. This is Malcolm Ryder, signing off for now. This is Malcolm Ryder, broadcasting from Station 17. If you're still out there, if you can still hear my voice, then know that the world as we knew it is gone. Cities have fallen, governments have collapsed, communication lines are dead, and what remains of the military is scattered, overwhelmed, or simply non-existent. What started as isolated incidents, violent outbursts in emergency rooms, sudden attacks in crowded streets, has now become an unstoppable tide. The fall of civilization wasn't gradual. It wasn't a slow decay of order and structure. It happened in waves, each one more devastating than the last, each one erasing another layer of human control until nothing was left but chaos. The first wave was denial. Authorities insisted it was a contained event, an outbreak limited to a few key locations. Quarantines were put in place, roads were blocked, flights were grounded, and curfews were enforced. They told us it was under control. They told us to stay inside. But what they didn't tell us, what they probably never admitted to themselves, was that it had already spread too far. The infected were already inside the safe zones, hiding among the crowds, asymptomatic carriers of something far deadlier than any known disease. It wasn't just in one city, it was in every city. The moment the first barricades went up, they were already useless. The moment they locked down, the infection was already within the walls. The second wave was panic. Once people realized there was no help coming, once they saw the reports of entire hospitals overrun, emergency responders torn apart, police stations abandoned, sanity cracked. The streets turned into war zones, not just between survivors and the infected, but between desperate people clinging to whatever illusion of control they could find. Supermarkets were looted within hours, pharmacies were emptied of supplies, cars lined the highways, jammed bumper to bumper in a futile attempt to escape. But there was nowhere to go. The infection moved faster than anyone could run. The moment one place fell, the next one was already under siege. The news anchors who once spoke in calm, controlled voices began to falter, their fear creeping through as they struggled to read updates that no longer made sense. And then one by one, they stopped reporting. One by one, the channels went dark. The third wave was silence. That was when I knew it was over. The noise of civilization, the hum of traffic, the distant voices of neighbors, the endless, constant signals of a world always awake, just stopped. There were no more sirens, no more breaking news, no more desperate pleas from government officials begging people to remain calm. The radio frequencies became static, the TV screens a loop of emergency warnings that no one was left to update, and then nothing. That's when I left the station for the first time. The streets were empty, but they were not abandoned. The signs of what had happened were everywhere. Overturned cars, blood-stained sidewalks, broken glass, bullet casings scattered like dead leaves. The smell of decay lingered in the air, a mix of burnt plastic, rotting flesh, and something else. Something metallic, something wrong. Bodies lay where they had fallen, some half-eaten, others twisted in ways no natural death could explain. A few still moved, twitching, grasping blindly at the air, their shattered skulls unable to process the world around them anymore. I stepped over them, gripping my makeshift weapon, a rusted metal pipe I had wrenched from a collapsed barricade. It felt useless, a toy against something that refused to die. I had one goal, to find answers. This wasn't a normal virus. It wasn't natural. Someone knew about it before it happened, and if there were any chance of understanding what went wrong, of finding some way to fight back, I had to start where it all began. I had to reach ground zero. The official reports claimed the first outbreak started in major cities, but that never made sense. Pandemics don't emerge simultaneously in multiple locations unless they are deliberately released. The truth had to be somewhere else, hidden beneath layers of misinformation and government denials, and I was going to find it. The first clue came in the form of a journal. It was lying in the wreckage of an overturned police vehicle, half burned, its pages charred at the edges but still readable. It belonged to an officer, a man named Ethan Graves. His last entry was short, written in shaky handwriting. They lied to us. It didn't start here. It started underground. They told us to keep people calm, to say it was just riots. But I saw what came out of that lab. I saw what it did. If you find this, don't go to the cities. Go west. Find Facility Zero. Find the truth. Facility Zero. I had never heard of it before, but if there was even the slightest chance that it held the answers, I had no choice but to follow the lead. I don't know how far west it is. I don't know what I'll find when I get there. But I have to try. I have to keep going. This is Malcolm Ryder, and I'm still alive. This is Malcolm Ryder, broadcasting once again from Station 17. If you're still listening, if you're still alive, then hear me now. I have seen them. I have seen the dead walk, and I do not use that phrase lightly. I am a man of reason, of logic, of science. I do not believe in superstition. I do not entertain ghost stories. And yet here I am, standing in the wreckage of a world that no longer makes sense, watching corpses rise and move with no explanation that fits within the boundaries of biology or physics. The dead do not sleep. The dead do not tire. The dead do not stop. And that, more than anything, terrifies me. I left the station yesterday. The silence had become unbearable, the walls too tight, the solitude too consuming. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to understand. So with my backpack filled with what little supplies I could find, canned food, bottled water, a flashlight, my emergency radio, I stepped outside and into a city that no longer belonged to the living. The streets were a graveyard. Buildings stood like tombstones, their windows shattered, their walls smeared with streaks of dried blood. Abandoned cars lined the roads, doors flung open as if their occupants had fled in a hurry. Some had not gotten far. Their bodies still lay where they had fallen, some untouched, others torn apart as if by wild animals. But it was not animals that had done this. At first I thought the city was empty, devoid of life or movement. But then I saw them. They did not roam in packs. They did not charge wildly or chase after anything that moved. They simply wandered, aimless, as if trapped in some half-conscious state between life and death. Some shuffled in circles, repeating the same motions over and over, like broken machines stuck in an endless loop. Others stood completely still, their heads tilted upward, as if listening to something I could not hear. Their eyes, those that still had them, were vacant, clouded over, their faces locked in expressions that were neither pain nor rage nor hunger, but something worse, something empty. I stayed low, moving between shadows, keeping my distance. I had seen the footage, heard the reports, but nothing prepared me for the sound they made. Not the growls or snarls of Hollywood monsters, not the moans of fictional ghouls, but something much worse. Ragged, struggling breaths, like air forced through damaged lungs, like a body trying to function despite knowing it shouldn't. And when they moved, when they turned their heads in my direction, sensing something, hearing something, smelling something, they did so with a slow, unnatural precision. There was no hesitation, no confusion. One moment, they were still. The next, they were walking toward me, their gait shifting from sluggish to determined in an instant. I had to move. My goal was the police station 2 miles west, a place I hoped might still have records, reports, anything that could tell me what really happened. I stayed in the alleyways, darting between wrecked cars, ducking beneath broken storefronts. I had no weapon, nothing that could put them down if they got too close. But that was when I learned the most terrifying truth of all. They did not stop. They did not lose interest. Once they sensed me, they followed, not with blind aggression, but with an unnatural patience. No matter how far I ran, how many corners I turned, how many obstacles I placed between us, they remembered. That's when I realized this was not mindless. This was not random. Something inside them was still working, still processing. Not intelligence in the way we understand it, but something far worse. Something instinctual. They did not move like predators. They moved like seekers, and I was something they were programmed to find. By the time I reached the station, my heart was pounding, my legs burning. The doors had been forced open, the lobby in ruins, broken desks, shattered glass, the faint stink of rotten gunpowder. There were bodies, some in uniforms, others in civilian clothes. They had made a last stand here, and they had lost. I moved quickly, stepping over shell casings, past dried pools of blood, into the back offices where old files and records lay scattered across the floor. That was when I found it, the second clue. A logbook, hastily written, pages torn and smeared with something dark. The last entry was rushed, almost illegible, but I made out the words. They knew. They told us it was riots, that it was airborne. But it's not. It's something else. Not a virus, not bacteria, something we don't understand. It spreads in ways we can't detect. Orders came from higher up, containment no longer possible, full eradication authorized. If you're reading this, get out. Don't stay in the cities. Go west. Facility 0, find the truth. Facility 0. Again, it wasn't a rumor, it was real. And the people who had been trying to hold this place together had known about it, had been given orders from someone high enough to demand silence, to demand destruction rather than an explanation. But what did they know that I didn't? What were they trying to hide? I didn't have time to think. The noise must have drawn them. By the time I looked up, I could see them moving through the broken doorway, stepping over the bodies of those who had fallen before. The same slow, methodical movement, the same silent persistence, the same empty eyes. I ran. I ran through the station, out the back door, through the alley, my breath burning in my throat. They followed, not fast, not frantic, just inevitable. I am back in the station now, my heart still racing, my mind trying to make sense of what I have seen. They are out there, just beyond the reach of the light, standing in the streets, waiting. I can feel their presence even when I cannot see them. The dead do not sleep. The dead do not stop. And they will never, never forget. This is Malcolm Ryder, and I am still alive. But for how much longer, I don't know. This is Malcolm Ryder, broadcasting on what may be the last working frequency of Station 17. If you're hearing this, then you're still alive. And if you're still alive, you need to listen carefully. I don't know how much longer I have before this signal dies, before the power in this place gives out for good, before I am forced to move again. But I need to tell you what I have seen. I need to tell you what I have learned. Because the dead are not just walking. They are changing. After my escape from the police station, I spent the next hours moving, weaving through the ruins of this city, trying to stay out of sight, avoiding open roads, ducking through alleys and abandoned buildings, always listening. The farther I traveled, the more I began to notice patterns. The infected, if that's even the right word for them, do not behave the way we expected, the way we were told they would behave. They are not just wandering bodies, not just aimless creatures drawn to sound and movement. There is something else happening, something I cannot yet explain. I first noticed it near the old hospital, St. Vincent's, a place that once overflowed with the sick and dying in those early days, before anyone understood what was coming. I had stopped there for shelter, thinking maybe I could find medical supplies, maybe even some records, something that might explain how this all began. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of decay, but underneath it, there was something else. Something sterile, metallic, artificial. The lights were dead, the hallways cast in deep shadows, but there was movement, slow, deliberate. I crept forward, stepping over broken gurneys, past walls stained with the frantic messages of those who had been here before me. We are abandoned. The doctors are dead. God help us. And then I saw them. Not just the infected, something else. At first, I thought they were simply more of the dead, standing in the corridor, their heads tilted, listening. But then I realized they were not moving randomly. They were standing in a pattern. 5 of them, evenly spaced, facing one direction, their bodies unnaturally still. And then, as if responding to something unheard, they turned in perfect unison, moving in the same direction toward the far end of the hallway, where a door marked restricted access stood slightly ajar. They were following something, not me, something else. I stayed low, moving carefully, my heart pounding in my chest as I followed them from a distance. The door led to the hospital's underground levels, the old storage and research wings. I don't know why I kept going. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was madness, but I had to know. The lower levels were almost untouched by the chaos above. No bloodstains, no bullet holes, no signs of the panic that had gripped the rest of the world. Just cold, sterile hallways lined with doors that bore no numbers, only symbols. Biohazard warnings, radiation markers, things that did not belong in a civilian hospital. And that was when I found the first real clue, a terminal, still powered, humming faintly in the silence. Someone had been here recently. Someone had left it running. And on its flickering screen, a single message repeated over and over. Containment failure, Protocol Z terminated. Protocol Z, the same term I had seen in fragments of reports back at the police station. The same term whispered in the first days of the outbreak, before all official communication went silent. I tried to access the files, but the system was locked, requiring an access key I didn't have. But there was one file, one unsecured document, a log entry, time-stamped mere hours before the final collapse of the hospital. They told us it was an infection, that it was spreading too fast to contain. But that was a lie. It didn't start in the city. It didn't start in the hospitals. It started here, in the research wing. It was never an outbreak. It was an experiment. And now it's out. I barely had time to process what I was reading before I heard it. A sound that did not belong in the realm of the living. A whispering, scratching noise, like nails dragging across metal. I turned, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, landing on something standing at the end of the corridor. It was one of them, but it was different. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tightly over its bones. Its head twitched in small, unnatural jerks, as if struggling to focus, as if listening to something I could not hear. Its fingers were too long, too sharp, and when it moved, it did not shuffle like the others. It moved with purpose. I don't know how I made it out. My memory of those moments is a blur of flashing lights, pounding footsteps, the distant sound of something chasing me, something moving faster than anything dead should move. By the time I reached the surface, I could see the sun beginning to rise through the shattered skyline, casting long, eerie shadows over the ruins. The city was not dead. It was changing. And now I am back here in Station 17, trying to make sense of it all. The dead are evolving. Some are different. Some are aware. And whatever started this, whatever they were doing in those underground levels, it was never meant to be found. This is no longer just survival. This is a hunt, and I am the prey. If you are listening, if you are out there, do not trust what they told you. Do not believe the lies. The dead do not walk by accident. They were made, and now they are listening. This is Malcolm Ryder, and I am still alive. This is Malcolm Ryder, broadcasting from Station 17. The air is heavy tonight. The wind outside carries a strange silence, the kind that settles before a storm, thick with unspoken warnings. I have sat here for hours, staring at the blinking red light of this console, knowing that the moment I speak, the moment I make my next move, there will be no turning back. I have been running for days, gathering fragments of a truth that was never meant to be uncovered. But now, I stand at the edge of something much larger, something darker, and I have to make a choice. Do I keep running, or do I go deeper? Every part of me is screaming to stay hidden, to keep my head down, to survive. But survival is no longer enough. Not after what I have seen, not after what I know. The dead are changing. They are not mindless. They are not wandering without cause. There is a pattern, a direction, an unseen force pulling the infected towards something. And whatever it is, it started long before the first news reports, long before the world knew what was happening. It started underground. It started in the shadows. And someone, somewhere, made the decision to let it happen. I cannot ignore the signs anymore. When I left the hospital, I thought I was done searching. I thought the horrors I had seen were enough to convince me that some things are better left buried. But the moment I stepped out onto that broken street, I realized that the city itself is still speaking. The answers are not locked away in some abandoned research lab. They are all around us, hidden in the wreckage, buried beneath the weight of panic and destruction. And so, I followed the signs. I walked through the ruins of neighborhoods that once pulsed with life, past shattered windows and overturned cars, past homes where dinner tables remained set, as if waiting for families that would never return. I listened to the echoes of a world that had no time to say goodbye. And then, I saw it. The first real proof that I was not chasing ghosts. A military convoy, rusting in the middle of an intersection, its vehicles scorched black, their tires melted into the asphalt. The insignia on the side, one I had seen before, in old reports, in whispered rumors, was barely visible beneath the soot. But I knew what it meant. This was not just a response team. This was a containment unit. They had been deployed before the outbreak went public, before the world even knew what was happening. I searched the wreckage, my hands moving through the ash, through the shattered glass, through the remnants of a failed mission. And then I found it. A metal case, half buried beneath the body of a soldier whose gas mask had melted to his face. My fingers trembled as I pried it open, revealing a stack of documents, charred at the edges but still legible. I scanned the pages, my eyes moving over the classified markings, the words stamped in bold ink. And there it was, Project Revenant. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I had seen the word before, buried in the files back at the police station, whispered in old recordings before the emergency broadcasts went silent. But now, here it was, in official documentation, proof that this was not just an accident, not just some unforeseen disaster. This had been planned. The document spoke of field tests, of controlled environments where subjects were exposed to an experimental pathogen. They spoke of behavioral observations, of subjects responding to external stimuli, of the emergence of what they called cognitive remnants. And then the final entry, the one that made my blood turn to ice. Phase 1 complete. Subjects demonstrate pack behavior, initiating Phase 2, adaptive cognition. I stared at the words, unable to move, pack behavior, adaptive cognition. They were not just testing a virus, they were testing them, studying how they evolved, how they responded, how they learned. This was never about stopping an outbreak. It was about controlling it, weaponizing it. I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I could walk away. I could pretend I never saw this. Pretend that none of it matters anymore, that the world is already too far gone for any of it to make a difference. Or I could keep going. I could follow the breadcrumbs left behind by the ones who tried to cover this up. I could find the next piece of the puzzle. I closed the case, my pulse hammering in my ears. I already knew my answer. I cannot stop now. There is a facility mentioned in the documents, one that was operational before the first cases were reported. It lies beyond the city, hidden in the hills, buried beneath the ruins of an old power station. The reports call it Site Echo. If there are answers to be found, they are there. This is my decision. I am leaving Station 17 at dawn. I will travel through the ruins, through the ghostly remains of a world that once was, and I will find Site Echo. I will uncover the truth, and I will tell you all of it, because the dead are listening, and so are we. This is Malcolm Ryder, signing off. This is Malcolm Ryder, broadcasting from somewhere deep in the ruins of a world we no longer understand. I have left Station 17. I have left behind the safety of its concrete walls, the comfort of my routines, the illusion that I could simply sit in a room and document the end of the world from a distance. The truth doesn't work that way. It demands movement. It demands risk. And so I have traveled through broken streets, past the echoes of a civilization that once thrived toward the place where it all began. Ground Zero. That's what the documents called it. The origin point. The spark that ignited the inferno. The location wasn't easy to find. The official records had been scrubbed clean, details erased, coordinates missing. But I had enough fragments, enough whispered rumors and half-burned pages to piece together a path. A research site buried beneath an abandoned power station miles away from the city's limits. A place that wasn't marked on any map. A place where no rescue teams had been sent. A place that had been left to rot, as if the world itself was trying to forget it existed. The journey was not easy. I walked roads that no longer had names, highways cracked and split apart, nature reclaiming what humanity had abandoned. I moved through dead towns where the air smelled of decay and the silence was absolute. Cars sat frozen in time, doors hanging open, belongings scattered on the asphalt as if their owners had simply vanished into thin air. I passed by a school where tiny desks still had notebooks on them, pages filled with half-finished lessons that would never be completed. The wind carried the smell of old fires, of things burned in desperation, of bodies turned to ash before they could rise again. And yet, the further I traveled, the more I began to notice something unsettling. The infected, they were fewer. At first, I thought it was luck. Maybe I had found a rare stretch of land where they simply hadn't wandered. But as the miles passed, a different possibility began to take root. They weren't absent. They were avoiding this place. Something about Ground Zero kept them away. The first sign of the site was the power station itself. A looming skeleton of metal and concrete, rusted beams stretching toward the sky like the ribs of some long-dead colossus. The towers were shattered, their wires hanging limp, transformers melted into unrecognizable forms. There had been an explosion here, a fire hot enough to blacken the surrounding landscape, to turn pavement into slag. But even as I stood at its edge, I knew this was just the surface. The real site lay beneath. I found the entrance hidden behind the ruins of an old substation, a stairwell leading down into darkness. The door at the bottom had been forced open long ago, its metal frame warped and torn. Something had come through here, something strong enough to rip through steel. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing walls lined with hazard signs, biohazard warnings, radiation symbols. Whatever had happened here, they had tried to contain it. They had failed. The air inside was thick, stale, carrying the scent of something artificial, something chemical. My footsteps echoed through empty corridors, past shattered glass and overturned equipment, past rooms where monitors still blinked weakly, feeding off the last remnants of emergency power. And then deeper still, I found what I was looking for, a laboratory. The place was a graveyard of research, papers scattered across the floor, computer screens cracked but still displaying error messages, files left open as if those who worked here had abandoned them in a hurry. The walls were lined with containment chambers, their glass thick but clouded, streaked with something dark. I shined my light inside one of them, and for the first time since entering this place, I felt true fear. There was something inside, not a corpse. Not one of the infected, something worse. A skeleton, human once, but changed. The bones were elongated, the skull slightly misshapen, the fingers clawed. It was as if the virus had continued its work long after death, reshaping, twisting, perfecting. The other chambers held more. Some still had remnants of flesh, their bodies frozen in different stages of transformation. This wasn't just a virus. This was evolution, forced and unnatural, driven by something beyond simple infection. And then I found the terminal. One computer still operational, still running on backup power. The files were protected, locked behind layers of security. But whoever left this place in a hurry had made mistakes. One document was still open, one last desperate note left behind by a scientist who had seen too much, who had understood what was happening too late. I read every word, and with each sentence, the horror grew. The virus, what they called Strand 9, hadn't been designed to kill. Not at first. It was meant to rebuild, to enhance. The initial trials had shown promise. Increased cognitive function, rapid tissue regeneration, resistance to disease, a cure for human fragility, a way to push the species beyond its limits. But something went wrong. The virus didn't just rebuild, it restructured. It saw the human body as a blueprint, a foundation to be improved upon, and it worked. The infected weren't just walking corpses, they were prototypes. And the most terrifying part, this wasn't an accident. The final line of the document was burned into my mind. Deployment authorized. Civilian exposure inevitable. Phase 3 will commence as planned. This had been released on purpose. The world didn't fall apart because of a lab accident. It fell apart because someone wanted it to. I shut the computer down, my hands shaking. The infected weren't mindless. They weren't random. They were following something. A signal, a command, something embedded in them from the very start. And if that was true, then somewhere, someone was still in control. I don't know what happens next. I don't know how deep this goes or if I'll even make it out of this place alive. But I do know one thing. This is far from over. This is Malcolm Ryder, and I will keep searching. Because someone out there is still listening, and they need to know the truth. Signing off. This is Malcolm Ryder, broadcasting again, if anyone is still listening. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to keep sending these transmissions. My equipment is running on borrowed power, my supplies are dwindling, and the roads ahead are darker than anything I've faced before. But I have no choice. I found something in Ground Zero, something that changes everything. The world didn't fall by accident, it was designed to fall. And I have to know why. My next destination is a place called Black Hollow. It wasn't on any maps I could find. No government records, no historical mentions. But in the last moments before I left that underground lab, I came across a reference buried in a corrupted file. Black Hollow Protocol, executed. That word, executed, lingers in my mind like a wound that won't heal. Was it a location, a project, a target? I don't know. But if this conspiracy has a beating heart, Black Hollow is where it pulses. The journey there was like stepping into a nightmare that refused to end. The world is quieter now. The infected are changing. I see them less often, but when I do, they are different, smarter, more aware. I caught sight of one yesterday standing in the ruins of a gas station. It wasn't shuffling, wasn't moaning or mindlessly wandering. It was watching me. It didn't attack. It just tilted its head as if trying to recognize something in me, something it had seen before. And then it walked away, disappearing into the mist like a ghost. I don't know what that means, but I do know this. Whatever Black Hollow is, it's calling them. The roads themselves are nearly impassable. Bridges have collapsed. Highways are nothing more than broken veins stretching across the corpse of civilization. The further I travel, the stranger the world becomes. There are places where nature seems to have taken over unnaturally fast. Thick, blackened vines choking entire buildings, trees that look diseased but somehow thrive, roots breaking through asphalt like fingers clawing out of the ground. And the air, it feels wrong. Not just heavy with decay, but charged like the static before a storm. I found an old car with some fuel still left in the tank and managed to get a few more miles in before it sputtered and died. On foot again, I followed the skeletal remains of the highway, moving through small towns that had been wiped clean of life. Every home, every store, every church was the same. Doors hanging open, windows shattered, belongings left exactly where they had been in the final moments of normalcy. It was as if the entire population had been plucked from existence, leaving only the hollow shell of a once living world behind. And then I found something I can't explain. A small town, no name, no signs, just a cluster of houses at the edge of the road. But unlike the others, it hadn't decayed. There were no broken doors, no shattered glass, no signs of struggle. It looked untouched, frozen in time. A single streetlight still flickered weakly, casting long shadows against perfectly parked cars. The houses were locked, the windows intact, and inside, everything was in place. Food still sat on dinner tables, clothes still hung in closets. It was as if the people had simply vanished, leaving their world untouched. I searched for hours, moving from house to house, hoping to find some sign of what had happened. And then, in the last home, I found something chilling. A radio, still powered, its speaker emitting nothing but a low, steady hum. Beside it, a notebook, a single sentence scrawled over and over again in shaky, frantic handwriting. They walked into the dark, and the dark swallowed them whole. I left that town as fast as I could. Now I am close. Black Hollow is no longer just a whisper in forgotten files. It's real. The road signs are gone, the maps erased, but something deep inside tells me I am near. I can feel it. It's as if the air itself is growing heavier with each step, as if the world is holding its breath. And there's something else, a sound, faint but constant, like a distant signal just beyond the range of my receiver. I don't know what I'll find in Black Hollow. Maybe it's another research site, another laboratory filled with secrets best left buried. Maybe it's something worse. But I've come too far to turn back now. If you're still listening, wherever you are, remember this. The world didn't die in a day. It was killed. And I intend to find out who held the knife. This is Malcolm Ryder, signing off. This is Malcolm Ryder. If you're hearing this, I'm still alive. But I don't know for how much longer. I've reached the place I was searching for. The place buried in hidden files, whispered in corrupted data. The place that was never meant to be found. Black Hollow. But it isn't a town. It isn't a bunker, a shelter, or a government stronghold. It's a graveyard. A dead place, forgotten and rotting beneath a sky that feels too heavy to breathe under. There are no people, no infected, no movement. Just miles and miles of ruins, stretching out like a wound in the earth, its edges burned and blackened, as if someone tried to erase it from existence. And at the center of it all, a lab, or at least what's left of one. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the skeletal remains of the facility. Most of it had collapsed into the ground, its metal frame twisted and charred, thick vines and dead roots crawling over shattered glass and rusted doors. It looked old, far older than the outbreak itself. But that doesn't make sense. If this place was abandoned long before 0 hour, then why was it mentioned in recent files? What was still happening here? I needed answers. Getting inside wasn't easy. The main structure had crumbled into itself, burying whatever secrets it once held under tons of broken steel and concrete. But there was a smaller outbuilding nearby, mostly intact, half buried under debris, but still standing. I forced my way in through a rusted service door, stepping into a world preserved in dust and silence. The smell of decay hit me first, not the kind left behind by the infected, but something older, something chemical. The walls were lined with thick glass observation windows, now cracked and smeared with dried handprints. Beyond them, empty rooms filled with rusted medical equipment, overturned desks, shattered vials. Papers covered the floor in heaps, their edges curled and brittle. Most of them were unreadable, reduced to smudges of ink and mildew. But But some had survived. I picked one up at random. A single word stood out, burned into the yellowed page like a scar. Reclamation. I don't know what it means, but it wasn't the last time I would see it. The deeper I searched, the more that word followed me, stamped on folders, printed on old reports, carved into steel filing cabinets. Reclamation protocol, reclamation directive, reclamation failure. Failure. That word sent a chill through me, because if something had failed, that meant something had been attempted. And then I found the security logs. Most of the system was dead, its servers fried from time, fire, or deliberate sabotage. But in the deepest part of the outbuilding, past a collapsed corridor and a flooded stairwell, there was a room, untouched. A backup generator still hummed weakly in the dark, its red emergency lights flickering against the walls. And in the center, a single monitor, cracked but still functional. The logs were incomplete, fragmented, but what remained was enough to freeze my blood. March 17th, 2:45 a.m. Containment breach detected in lower sectors. Reclamation teams deployed. March 7th, 3:12 a.m. Teams unresponsive. Internal lockdown initiated. Specimen exhibiting non-standard behavior. Termination protocols engaged. March 17, 4:20 a.m. Termination unsuccessful. Initiating full site purge. March 17th, 4:15. Purge incomplete. Evacuation order issued for remaining personnel. Black Hollow protocol executed. Then nothing. No more logs, no more records, just silence. I leaned back, trying to make sense of what I had just read. This facility hadn't just been another research site. It had been an experiment, and something inside had gone wrong. Badly wrong. I searched further, moving to a row of locked storage cabinets, their glass doors clouded with dust and age. Most of them were empty, stripped clean long before I had arrived. But one had been left open, its contents spilled onto the floor. A file, a journal, and a key. I took them all. The journal belonged to someone named Dr. Elias Carter, a lead researcher assigned to Black Hollow. His notes were erratic, frantic, shifting from clinical precision to desperate paranoia. He spoke of the specimens, of their behavior, their adaptation. But one entry stood out, scrawled in shaking, near unreadable handwriting. We were fools, we thought we could control it, but it learns, it remembers. The infection is not a disease, it's a reclamation, a return, and we are not the first. I don't know what he meant by that. Not the first what? Victims, civilizations, failed experiments? I kept reading. They told us it was a virus, a mutation, but that was a lie. It was never meant to be contained. It was never meant to be cured. It was meant to spread, to reclaim what was lost. We are not at war with a sickness. We are at war with something far older, and we are losing. My hands were shaking as I turned the page, only to find it torn out. Whatever final thoughts Dr. Carter had written, someone had taken them, hidden them. I turned to the file, flipping through degraded pages filled with complex chemical sequences and structural breakdowns of the infection. But one thing caught my eye. A location. Not here. Not Black Hollow. Something beyond it. Something deeper. The hallowed vault. I don't know what it is, but I intend to find out. I took the key, the journal, and the file, stuffing them into my bag before stepping back outside into the dying light of the evening. The world felt different now, heavier, like I had disturbed something that should have been left buried. As I turned to leave, I heard it, a sound I had never heard from an infected before. Not a growl, not a scream, but a whisper. I spun around, rifle raised, scanning the ruins for movement. Nothing. Just shadows stretching long against the broken ground. But I know what I heard. They're watching me. They know what I've found. And they don't want me to leave. This is Malcolm Ryder, broadcasting while I still can. If you're out there, if you're still listening, know this. The outbreak wasn't an accident. It wasn't a failure. It was a beginning. And I intend to find out what comes next. Signing off. This This is Malcolm Ryder, broadcasting from somewhere I probably shouldn't be. If you're hearing this, know that I've made it out of Black Hollow. Barely. The things I found there, they were never meant to be uncovered. And I think something or someone is trying to erase them all over again. After I left the ruins of the lab, I kept moving. I didn't sleep. I barely stopped to eat. I had the journal, the file, and that damned key burning a hole in my pack. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Carter's words scrawled in my mind. The infection is not a disease, it's a reclamation. And that whisper, the one I heard before leaving Black Hollow, it still lingers in my ears. I'm not sure if I imagined it or if something was really there. But I don't have time to doubt myself, because I found something else. It started with a simple idea. If the outbreak wasn't an accident, if the infection was engineered, then someone had to have documented it. Not in government reports, not in sanitized briefings or redacted files, but in something real. A record of events as they happened. Something raw, something no one was supposed to hear. So I went looking. I followed the coordinates buried in Carter's notes. They led me miles away from Black Hollow, through dead highways and abandoned farmsteads, past skeletal remains of towns stripped bare by time and infection. But there was something different about this place. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no wind, just the distant crackle of static from my radio, whispering in the background like a ghost. And then I found it. A radio tower, half collapsed, leaning against the remains of an old emergency broadcasting station. Its metal frame was scorched, twisted from some explosion long ago. Most of the building was caved in, its roof shattered, its walls blackened by fire. But the front doors were still intact, welded shut with thick iron bars, as if someone had tried to keep something inside. I forced my way through. The inside was worse than I expected. Equipment lay scattered across the floor, wires ripped from walls, consoles smashed beyond recognition. Whoever had been here last had tried to destroy everything before leaving. But in their rush, they missed something. A server rack, locked behind a metal cage. It took me over an hour to pry it open, using whatever I could find to break through the rusted bolts. When I finally got inside, my hands were shaking as I powered up what was left of the system. Most of the data was corrupted beyond repair, but one directory still remained, an archive of audio logs. I played the first one. At first, nothing but static. Then a voice. Female. Shaky. Breathing heavily. If anyone finds this, my name is Dr. Evelyn Kessler. I was part of the research team at Site Theta. I don't know how much time I have. They're here. They know I'm broadcasting. But people need to know the truth. This isn't a virus. It's not an outbreak. It's a correction, a reset, and we were just the first test. The recording cut out abruptly, replaced by silence. My blood went cold. I played the next one. They lied to us. They told us it was an accident, that the first infections were due to exposure, mutation, something we didn't understand. But that was never true. The infection, no, the entity, was never meant to be studied. It was meant to be awakened. And when it finally did, we weren't researchers anymore. We were fuel. Another cut, another gap of silence. I kept going, listening to log after log, each one worse than the last. I heard fear, desperation, the sound of people breaking down as they realized what they had unleashed. And then, one of the final recordings, one that made me stop breathing altogether. They think we're gone, that the station is empty, but I hear them. The voices in the static, they're learning. They don't just mimic, they remember. The things we've said, the things we've done, it's all in them now. And if you're hearing this, they already know about you too. I ripped my headset off, my pulse hammering in my skull. I wasn't alone in that station. Somewhere in the wreckage, something moved. I killed the power to the server and grabbed the hard drive, shoving it into my pack before slipping out through the ruined hallway. I moved fast, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that something was following me, just out of sight. By the time I reached the outer fence, The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky the color of dried blood. I didn't stop running until I was miles away, my radio silent, my breath ragged. Now I'm here broadcasting to you. I don't know what's on this hard drive yet. I don't know what else those logs contain or if they even matter anymore. But I know one thing for certain. This isn't about survival. It never was. This is about control, about something older than any of us, something up after being buried for far too long. We thought we were at war with the dead. We were wrong. The dead are just messengers. The real war is still coming. This is Malcolm Ryder, signing off. This is Malcolm Ryder broadcasting again. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do this. I don't know how many of you are still listening. But if you are, if you can hear me, then understand this. Everything we thought we knew about this outbreak was a lie. Everything. This was never about a virus, never about an accidental breach, never about some unstoppable natural pathogen that spiraled out of control. No. This was deliberate. This was designed, and I intend to find out by whom. After leaving the broadcast station, I kept moving. I didn't sleep. I didn't stop. There was something in that place, something that heard me, something that knew I was there. It wasn't just the dead. It wasn't just the infected. It was something else, something lurking beneath the surface of all of this. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to hear those recordings, that even now, something was trying to erase them, just like it had erased the people who made them. But I have the hard drive, and as long as I have it, the truth isn't buried yet. I needed a place to go, somewhere safe enough to go through the files without being torn apart in the process. That led me to an old military checkpoint, one of the dozens set up in the early days of the outbreak, back when they still thought they could contain it. It was abandoned now, overgrown with weeds, its sandbags torn apart, its fences bent inward as if something had clawed its way through. Vehicles were left to rot, their engines stripped, their windows shattered. Whoever had been here left in a hurry, or they never left at all. I made my way inside cautiously, stepping over old shell casings and the remains of broken radios. The command tent was still standing, its canvas torn but mostly intact, shielding me from the cold wind that had begun howling through the ruins. I pulled out the hard drive, connected it to a scavenged laptop I had been carrying, and prayed that the damn thing still worked. The files were fragmented, corrupted in places, but still there. Dozens of logs, encrypted documents, images that I couldn't make sense of at first. But then I found something buried deep. An old classified report labeled Project Dominion, Stage 3 Activation Protocol. I opened it. What I read made my stomach turn. They weren't just studying the infected, they were testing them, guiding them. The infection wasn't some rogue pathogen, it was a tool, a system, something designed to adapt, to learn, to spread intelligently. The logs described behavioral changes in the infected, changes that suggested they weren't mindless husks at all, but something worse. Something still aware in some capacity, something capable of memory, of reaction, of coordinated movement under the right conditions. The documents detailed a control mechanism, an unseen influence shaping the way the outbreak evolved. Not random, not chaotic, deliberate. The infected weren't just moving aimlessly, they were following patterns, signals. Then I saw the name, Dr. Adrian Langley. A name buried in the reports, always referenced, but never elaborated on. According to the documents, he was the lead researcher behind Project Dominion, a classified government-backed initiative designed to explore the potential of biological signal manipulation. The idea was simple. If a pathogen could be engineered to override human neural function, then in theory, it could be used as a tool for control. A new kind of warfare, one that didn't rely on bombs or bullets, but on a virus that didn't just kill, it assimilated. Langley was the architect, but there was no mention of what happened to him, no mention of where he had gone after the outbreak began, or if he had survived at all. The last entry simply read, "Langley has gone dark. Dominion is online." That phrase, "Dominion is online," it repeated over and over in the final logs, always attached to sudden shifts in infected behavior, to unexplained outbreaks in areas that should have been quarantined. It was as if something had flipped a switch, as if the infected weren't acting on primal instinct alone, but were instead responding to commands. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every shadow seemed longer than it should have been. I kept my rifle close, my radio scanning through dead frequencies, hoping for something, anything that would tell me I wasn't losing my mind. Then I found it, a transmission, faint, distant, almost buried beneath the static, a voice distorted, broken, but unmistakably human. "Ryder, if you can hear this, I know what you found. They know too. You need to keep moving. Find Langley. He's the only one who can stop this. Look for the Omega signal. Follow the numbers. You don't have much time." Then nothing. Silence. I replayed it over and over, trying to make sense of it. The voice was male, older, rough, but familiar. I didn't know who it was, but he knew me. And more importantly, he knew about Langley. The hunt for truth wasn't over. It was just beginning. I packed my things and left the outpost before dawn, heading north towards what used to be the city of Ashford. If there were answers, they would be there. If Langley was still alive, that's where I'd find him. But something else is happening now. The infected, they're changing. I see them moving differently, watching, waiting, like they know something I don't. The air feels heavier, like the world itself is holding its breath. And the signal, the one I picked up, it's getting stronger. I don't know what's waiting for me in Ashford, but I have no choice. I have to go. This is Malcolm Ryder, signing off. This is Malcolm Ryder, broadcasting again. If you can hear me, if you're still out there, then listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you isn't just another story about survival. It's about something much worse. Something I can't quite put into words yet, because the moment I try to define it, it slips through my fingers like smoke. I have reached the outskirts of Ashford, the city that was once a hub of life, a place of movement, noise, and humanity. Now, it is none of those things. It is a husk, an empty ruin stretching towards the horizon, a monument to something far more terrifying than death itself. This city is not abandoned. It is waiting. The moment I stepped past the broken highway sign that read "Welcome to Ashford," I felt it. A pressure in the air, something unnatural, something wrong. The wind here doesn't sound right. It moves through the streets without resistance, without purpose, as if the city itself is holding its breath. No birds, no distant echoes of movement, no signs of struggle like in the other places I've passed through. Just stillness, as if everything that once lived here simply stopped. The infected are here. I can see them, but they aren't moving. They stand in clusters on the sidewalks, leaning against cars, slumped in doorways like statues frozen in time. Their heads twitch occasionally. Their fingers clench and release in slow, unnatural movements, but they do not react to my presence. I have never seen them behave this way before. They are awake, but dormant, listening to something I can't hear, responding to a command I can't perceive. This is not normal. This is not instinct. This is something else. I keep to the shadows, moving through alleys and abandoned stores, stepping over shattered glass and discarded belongings. The further I go, the stronger the feeling gets. A sensation deep in my gut telling me that I am being watched, but not by human eyes. Something is here, hidden within the silence, unseen but ever present. It knows I'm here. It's aware. I find shelter in what used to be a pharmacy. The shelves are looted, the registers ripped apart, the walls covered in a thin layer of dust that has settled over everything like a burial shroud. The only sign of life is a half-eaten corpse near the counter, long since dried out, its skull caved in from an old impact. Whoever they were, they died before the city fell completely silent. That means there was a time, however brief, When things here were still normal, when people were still running, still fighting, what changed? I take out my laptop and sift through the files again, searching for anything that mentions Ashford, anything that might explain why this place is different from the others. Then I find something, an old transmission log, fragmented but partially intact, sent 7 days before the outbreak became uncontainable. Omega signal detected, frequency unstable, possible anomaly in neural patterning, early stage synchronization observed in Sector 7, awaiting further instructions. Synchronization. That word keeps appearing in these reports, buried between layers of encrypted data, hidden in research notes left behind by people who are probably long dead. If I piece it together, it suggests that the infected in this area aren't just mindless drones. They're connected, linked in a way we don't understand, not just to each other, but to something else, something bigger. Then, the laptop screen flickers. For a brief second, an image flashes across the display, something that shouldn't be there, something embedded in the corrupted files like a virus. It's a photograph, blurry and distorted, taken from what looks like a security camera. It shows a figure standing in the middle of an intersection, tall, thin, its features obscured by static. The streetlights around it are shattered. The infected are kneeling in its presence. The image disappears, replaced by an error message. But I know what I saw. I know what it means. I shut the laptop and take a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Outside, the sky is growing darker, but there is no sunset, no shift in the clouds, just an unnatural dimming, as if something is leaching the light out of the air. I have to move. I have to keep searching. If Langley is alive, if he left behind anything that can explain what's happening, I have to find it before it's too late. I step back into the street, gripping my rifle tightly, and move toward the city's center. The silence follows me. The infected remain still, as if waiting for something I cannot hear. And in the distance, beyond the skeletal remains of the skyline, I see something flicker. A brief pulse of red light, faint but unmistakable, coming from what used to be Ashford's Central Research Facility. That's where I have to go. And I have the feeling that when I get there, I won't be alone. This is Malcolm Ryder, signing off. This is Malcolm Ryder. If you're listening to this, then you're still out there. And if you're still out there, you need to hear what I'm about to say. Something is happening. Something I don't fully understand yet, but I can feel it closing in, like the static before a storm. I reached Ashford's Central Research Facility, the place where that faint red light pulsed in the darkness. I thought I would find answers. Instead, I found something far worse. The streets leading up to the facility were the same as the rest of Ashford, silent, still, an entire city caught in some unnatural paralysis. The infected didn't react to my movements, their heads twitching slightly, their mouths opening and closing as if caught in the middle of some silent conversation. But as I got closer to the facility, I started noticing something different. The bodies, not the infected, not like before. These were fresh. People not yet turned, their corpses scattered across the street like they had simply dropped where they stood. No signs of struggle, no wounds, no gunfire, no blood, just gone, their eyes open and staring at nothing. And yet their expressions weren't frozen in fear or pain. They looked empty, hollow, like something had taken more than just their lives. I kept moving, stepping carefully over the bodies, my pulse hammering in my ears. I needed to reach that building, needed to know what was inside. The research facility was a towering structure of steel and glass, its windows shattered, its doors hanging open as if inviting me in. There was no power, no lights, just the deep hum of silence pressing in from all sides. The air inside was thick with dust and something else, something stale, something wrong. The entrance hall was a mess of overturned desks, scattered papers, and equipment that looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. The deeper I went, the worse it became. Computer monitors smashed, cables torn from the walls, blood splattered across the floors, but no bodies. Only empty uniforms, lab coats crumpled on the ground as if the people inside them had simply vanished. I found an office with a still functioning terminal, its emergency backup power flickering weakly. The screen displayed a security log, timestamps running up to the moment everything must have fallen apart. I scrolled through quickly, looking for anything useful, anything that explained why this city had fallen differently than the others. Then, I saw it. Containment breach in sublevel 3. Neural resonance destabilization detected. Personnel advised to evacuate immediately. Neural resonance. That phrase again. I kept reading. The logs became more frantic, more disjointed. Warnings about frequencies beyond human perception, about an event called phase shift, about a signal causing cognitive displacement in organic matter. Then the last entry. Just one line, typed in a hurry, unfinished. They're not dead. They're not gone. That was it. No explanation, no answers, just silence. But I had seen enough. I had heard the stories, the missing people, the bodies without wounds, the infected that stood frozen, listening to something I couldn't hear. What if they weren't just infected? What if they were connected? I turned away from the terminal, my breath coming faster now. The air felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. And then, from the hallway outside, I heard something. Not a growl, not a shuffle, not the sound of the infected moving. A whisper. It was distant, barely audible, but it was there. A voice speaking in tones too low to understand, drifting through the empty corridors like smoke. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It wasn't a voice that should have been there at all. I gripped my rifle tighter and stepped back into the hallway. The whispering stopped. The air went still. Then, as I turned the corner, I saw them. The bodies. The ones I had seen outside, the ones lying motionless in the streets. They were gone. All of them. Nothing remained but their empty clothes, their belongings scattered across the ground. No signs of movement, no signs of struggle. Just gone. I ran. I don't know why, but I ran. My instincts took over, my body screaming at me to get out, to leave this place behind, to put as much distance between myself and whatever had just happened. I burst out of the facility and into the street, my heart hammering against my ribs. The infected were still there, standing motionless, unblinking, their heads tilted slightly as if listening to something far away. But now, something was different. They weren't listening anymore. They were watching. Every single one of them, their dead, glassy eyes locked onto me, their bodies rigid, their mouths slightly open, as if they were trying to speak. I didn't wait to find out what they were going to say. I ran. I ran until my legs burned, until my lungs felt like they were tearing apart, until the silent city was behind me and the empty highways stretched out before me. Only when I was miles away did I stop, collapsing against the side of an overturned truck, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Something happened in Ashford, something that wasn't just a virus, wasn't just an outbreak. People didn't die. They disappeared. And I have the horrible creeping feeling that they're not gone. They're still here, somewhere, listening. This is Malcolm Ryder, signing off.